Okay, so everybody, I'm Giles. I'm going to be talking today about what's coming up in CloudStack and some of the stuff that's already just come out in our last release as well. Just a quick show of hands in the room. Who is relatively new to CloudStack here? Define your own relative. Fair enough. So about a third of you. So most of you are sort of experienced with CloudStack. That's good because I'm going to not talk about a lot of the great base functionality of Apache CloudStack. I'm just going to focus on what's been coming along in the last couple of releases. For me, who am I? I'm Giles. I'm a PMC member and committer in Apache CloudStack. Have been for over 10 years now. I founded this group, and as Sven says, this is an informal group. It's nothing officially sanctioned from the Apache Software Foundation, but again, this was about 10 years ago. We found a whole bunch of people who were using CloudStack, working with CloudStack, wanted to sort of get together and discuss ideas and share problems and have a few beers. So we started doing this. We've had over the years lots of meetups in London because that's where we were based. We've had meetups here. Where else? Somebody help me. All over the place. We've been to Paris, Amsterdam, thank you. Prague, thank you. I call myself the chair of this group. It's not even an official group, okay? So it's just, I was the person who organized it initially. My day job is I'm founder of Shape Blue. We're a services company who work exclusively with Apache CloudStack and organize things like this. I used to be a physicist. I used to be a software engineer. I haven't written a line of code, luckily, for Apache CloudStack for 10 years. I also do some sailing. And I do a bit of hiking, and that's me getting ready for work on a Monday morning. Okay, so recent releases of Apache CloudStack. CloudStack for a long time settled into sort of 2 significant releases a year. 2024 has gone crazy, okay? It's gone crazy because the community's gone crazy, because adoption's gone crazy, and we all know the root cause of why we've had this massive spike. Is something I'm going to talk about a lot. I know Marco's doing a whole talk on it. Is a lot of people who are looking to run away from VMware very, very quickly, and CloudStack is a perfect fit. That adds up. How many is that? Jeez, 11 releases. If I include 4.20 4.20 that I'm going to talk about quite a lot today, which is in code freeze at the moment, we've had 11 releases in 2024. The other thing you'll notice is security releases coming out. Again, that's related to adoption. So we're seeing some big enterprise organizations adopting CloudStack. They're all doing lots of pen testing on CloudStack. They're finding a few issues, a few CVEs that are coming through, and the way we respond to that is by doing a security release. But in terms of those releases, what I'm going to sort of really talk about today are the core LTS releases, which are the feature releases. All the maintenance and security releases are effectively, as they say, they're just maintenance, they're bug fixes. Although there's a little bit of stuff that came in 4.19.1, which affects some of the functionality I'm going to tell you about today. So this talk today really is looking at what was new in 4.19 and also what is about to come out in 4.20. So it's almost like 2 talks in one. Again, another show of hands. Who is already familiar with 4.19? Who's running 4.19? Good, because if everybody put their hand up, then that's half my talk gone. Okay, so let's dive in and start looking at some features. 4.19 was released early February this year. 315 new features in total. Bug fixes, 26 of those are headline features. It's an LTS release, as 4.20 will be an LTS release, which means the community commits to supporting it for a period of 18 months. So 4.19 is basically, if people are turning up and downloading CloudStack and deploying CloudStack, 4.19 is currently what they'll be deploying. It's EOL. Doesn't mean it has to be EOL because it's open source. You can carry on running it, but the community will stop supporting it in the summer of 25. Okay, the features I'm talking about here, I'm not going to go over all of them because we'd need to be here for the whole day just listening to me talking about features. These are effectively my favorites. Think of them as the flagship features in 4.19. First one, obviously very topical, and people think, oh, was this strategic? Did the community see what was coming with? No, this was something that had been worked on for 6 months before the whole Broadcom thing happened. The timing was absolutely perfect, right? So the Broadcom thing happens in January. It was announced. We released 4.19 with a VMware migration to KVM migration. It was complete chance and coincidence. Now, you could argue that going back over the last year or so, what we certainly see is a general movement away from VMware to KVM, and that's been happening for some time anyway, pre the whole Broadcom thing. But the timing of this was absolutely perfect. So what we've got now is the ability to go out to an external vCenter or an internal one. I'll talk more about that in a second. Bring in instances into CloudStack, VMs into CloudStack, migrate them to KVM, and bring them up in CloudStack, all in one operation. Now, CloudStack has always been hypervisor agnostic. It supports KVM, it supports VMware, it supports XCP-NGs. What are Citrix calling their hypervisor today? They're calling it a hypervisor. It supports whatever their Citrix are calling their hypervisor today. And a lot of organizations still do manage multi-hypervisor environments using Apache CloudStack. It's been one of the use cases for it. Actually, when all the initial concern was happening around Broadcom, was that people wanted to put CloudStack in as a sort of abstraction layer in case they needed to move. So we've always been able to have vSphere clusters in Apache CloudStack. The difference is, the thing we can do now is actually take an existing vCenter and bring it in, turn it into KVM, or if you've got workloads already in CloudStack, you can migrate those directly within CloudStack from ESX over to KVM. I think I've said that. So it does all of the conversion, instances of VMs, the disks, networks, all of the configuration, all the metadata around the VM. It's an admin-only feature. This isn't something that a normal CloudStack user can use at the moment. Although I've seen some interesting discussions going on mailing lists around, in theory, this could be allowed to be a user feature. But the way CloudStack interacts with vCenter, that might create some interesting security considerations for people. It can take existing CloudStack VMware instances or external instances. Behind the scenes, it uses V2V. And the way the tool is configured, you tell the tool what host you want to do the work, because it's a significant conversion process. It's basically taking your VMware instance, converting it to QCal2, mounting it as a KVM instance in CloudStack. For Linux instances, it will work on running VMs. We've seen some really interesting, successful results around that. Windows, is recommended that they are stopped. In fact, we know it will fail if Windows instances are running. The first release of this in February with 4.19.0 worked, and it was quite usable. But then when people started using it as a batch in the API to start to do hundreds and thousands of VMs, they found some performance issues around it. So 4.19.1, the maintenance release, fix those performance issues. So if you're going to use this tool and you're going to use it at any form of scale, you need to be looking at 4.19.1. Okay? That's the only thing I'm going to mention about 4.19.1 today. Everything else is either 4.19 or 4.20. Okay, there's a few restrictions around it in terms of what the destination KVM hosts have to be running, and some prerequisites when you install Virt2v. I'm not going to go through all of those today. I'll share these slides afterwards, and this is all in the CloudStack documentation. Okay, so just to prove it wasn't a strategic thing, and it was all about the fact that Broadcom were about to buy VMware. At the same time, there's a new set of import tools for KVM instances. So, CloudStack supports KVM, obviously, but getting an instance from an external KVM host into CloudStack was always a bit of a cumbersome process. You had to create a template based on that host and then deploy an instance based on that template. That's all now been automated. Okay, so this is the same concept, but it's not doing the conversion from a VMware image over to a KVM image. Okay, imports external KVM instances from a remote host, from any QCal2 file you choose, or unmanaged instances which might be running in your existing CloudStack infrastructure. Very simple UI. And again, just like the VMware one, it's more likely people are going to use this in batch using the REST API or using our command line Cloud Monkey CMK. What's interesting about this is somebody sort of mentioned this after this being out a couple of months to me. It's like, what this does, of course, it's it's opening up the world with people who are using CloudStack as really just as a KVM management tool. And we're starting to see people adopting CloudStack who actually really aren't interested in all of the self-service and necessarily the clever, amazing networking stuff that CloudStack does. They just want a set of tooling around KVM. So the ability to now point CloudStack at a KVM environment, say bring all that in, is a pretty important tool for people like that. Okay, arguably another one that was perfectly timed. DRS, we all know. DRS, by the way, is not a trademark before somebody suggests that. Dynamic Resource Scheduler is a trademark. DRS is the thing we've associated with VMware environments for a long time, the ability to manage workload load and move instances around between hosts. Okay. Now, CloudStack has always been able to support DRS through the underlying, through VMware if you were using VMware, but never through other hypervisors. So this is a lightweight DRS native to Apache CloudStack. And the logic is here, CloudStack is going to take over responsibility as a background task for moving your workloads, your instances, into a model that you've specified. We've only got two with CloudStack. There is balanced and condensed. The balanced algorithm is going to try and balance your instances across all of the hosts in a cluster, okay, and make that distribution as even as possible. This can be global, and it can also be per cluster as well. It's up to you as an admin how you want to configure it. A condensed algorithm is going to try and squash the instances into as fewer hosts without compromising performance as possible. Okay, and they're the only two models. It's very easy to set up. I think that's the cluster level configuration there. Okay, and there's some global settings as well. Have I got a picture of some of those global settings? There's a balanced. Oh, sorry. There we go. Set of global settings, which algorithm you're going to use, whether it's enabled or interval it's going to look at performing migrations on. This uses the existing KVM live migration functionality that was already in CloudStack from 4.17 or something like that. And then you can set some intervals, set some other metrics, how much imbalance is allowed, and off it will go. In the background, migrating VMs, migrating instances between hosts to reach the nirvana that is your perfect balance or your perfect imbalance to whatever percentage you want. Very, very powerful feature. Okay, still on 4.19, by the way. This all came out in February. VNF Appliances. So a VNF appliance is a virtualized network feature, virtualized network function. And I'm sure most organizations, most of you here have deployed virtual instances of Cisco routers, of firewalls, of things in your environment at some point. You've always been able to do this with CloudStack because these things are virtual machines, right? They're instances. But what you've never been able to do is configure that so a user can easily consume network appliances. And that's what this new functionality does. So as the use cases, cloud service providers selling branded network components. I want to sell somebody a Cisco ASA firewall because their security people say they must have a Cisco ASA firewall. And rather than just using CloudStack's native virtual router for firewalling, you can drop in, they can provision a Cisco-based appliance. SD-WAN, load balancing, WAN optimizers, the world's your oyster. Okay? It allows users to deploy and configure third-party appliances. There's an example here. I'm not going to do a live demo today because I'm on an unfamiliar laptop with a German keyboard, so it's just lots of screenshots. But actually, any of this afterwards, I'm here all day. If anybody wants to look at any of these things, I can spin up a 419 or a 420 instance. I've got a new top-level object in CloudStack, which is a VNF appliance. Adding one looks very similar to initially to adding an instance, to adding a virtual machine. Okay, here I've got, what have I got? A pfSense, Cisco ASA. The difference is when I actually deploy these, it isn't just deploying the instance, it's then configuring all of the interfaces and all of the networking because CloudStack knows that these are VNF appliances, not normal virtual machines. Okay. And there's a picture there. That's when I'm creating a template for these things. I'm configuring all the interfaces, specifying how those interfaces are managed, how the user interacts with those interfaces. So a user can basically now go through the process of deploying a VNF appliance, up it comes, and then go through and start managing that appliance. Okay, still on 419, CloudStack object storage. One of the things with CloudStack that's sort of differentiated it over the years is CloudStack's always, as a community, we've always kept the scope tight. Okay, there was another open source project that also had Stack in its name and some great technology over there, but that was about creating, we want our own block storage, we want our own this, we want our own object storage, we want to do everything. CloudStack just said, but basically, I think it's from its legacy that it came from a startup and then Citrix had to go with it and everything. We're just orchestrate. We don't want to do storage ourselves. We do networking stuff, but most stuff, storage, we want to let other people do that. We're not trying to do a PaaS. We are just this thin layer. So there's been, over the years of the community, there's been people trying to bring in things that's taking CloudStack off in different directions. And there's always been pushback. Let's keep the scope highly defined. However, object storage, particularly in the service provider space, every user says, well, where can I get some S3 compliant object storage? So people were bolting in third-party solutions from other places, and it was a bit awkward from a user experience viewpoint and API viewpoint. So CloudStack 419 now comes with, you see it on the side there, the CloudStack Object Storage Framework. CloudStack isn't providing the object storage. That's backed off to whatever you want to use to provide your object storage. What CloudStack is doing is presenting that through its API, through its UI, and allowing people to use that object storage in their instances, okay? But CloudStack doesn't do the work, okay? So a framework was created by the community which would allow any S3 compliant object storage vendor to create a provider, a driver, okay, which basically maps their API to what CloudStack and give one seamless experience, which is analogous to what CloudStack does with storage, existing storage, with volumes, right? Your users don't know that you're using Ceph or you're using Storepool or whatever. They just see it as a CloudStack volume. Same model here. Okay, so the provider was, the framework was created. Currently a provider for MinIO, which is an open source object store. Ceph in progress, although there may well be some news on that when I move on to 4.20. I think Guido, did you get it in? Oh, well, I'll scrap that when I start talking about. But hopefully, fingers crossed, in 4.20 we should see the Ceph provider. And Christian's going to be talking about some work they've been doing on another provider. What did you say it was for? Alway. Yeah. So we're seeing people coming in the community, creating providers. You've got a choice there of what you actually back the object storage out to. CloudStack UI's got a browser, an object file browser, a bucket browser, I suppose. And it supports quota, encryption, versioning, all the standards feature set you would expect to see on an S3 compliant storage. Yeah, that was going to be the big reveal, Guido, that actually. Okay, that's me creating a bucket. So it's a two-step process. As an admin, I go and create a object store, which creates the connection to MinIO, to Ceph, or to whatever. And then this is me as a user. I go and create buckets in that object store. And importantly, for those of you who are service providers selling this is all picked up in CloudStack usage service, so you can understand what people are consuming, et cetera, et cetera. This is a small feature that a lot of people probably wouldn't notice unless I sort of highlighted it here. CloudStack's got its snapshotting model. I'm sure everybody in the room knows that. We've now got the ability, when you take a snapshot, take a copy of that to a second zone. So traditionally, the snapshot is going to sit in the same zone. Okay, I suppose quiz for the room. Anybody think where this could be particularly useful? It's a tiny little feature, but it has some very big implications. DR, from a user-driven DR, because your zone, of course, more than likely will be a different data center, could be somewhere completely different geographically. And this is giving the users the power natively in CloudStack to take snapshots off into second zones. Very simple feature, but actually we're seeing people use this as a cornerstone for some DR-style functionality for some of their users. Still on 4.19, scheduled lifecycle operations. Again, this is something CloudStack missed for a long time. It's the ability to create a schedule around an instance. I think the only actions it supports is start, stop, and reboot, and to do those at time schedules with no user interaction. The CloudStack management server will trigger, and you can specify to reboot with a force, et cetera, et cetera. A useful tool, people tell me, if you are managing lots of instances. OAuth 2 authentication, again, framework-based. The framework providers have been written for Google and for GitHub, okay? And this is the idea that I can log on to CloudStack and sign in with GitHub instead of using the CloudStack native login, okay? Now, word of warning in terms of missing bits of this. In my opinion, I mean, OAuth 2 obviously is a very secure authentication mechanism, but the real value of it is for signing up for things, right? So I go to some shop website and I use OAuth 2 to use Facebook or Twitter or X, whatever it's called. Now it saves me putting all my details in, it's moving the data. That isn't implemented in CloudStack. And the reason is CloudStack does not have deliberately a self-sign-up. It never has, and that's a deliberate been a security decision over the years, because that opens up all sorts of different stuff in terms of workflow verification and what have you. That may be something that changes if the community and if the demand is there. So this is great, it works, but it's not giving the true value of OAuth 2, in my opinion, if it hasn't got the sign up. Again, it's a simple global setting, or a couple of global settings. You switch it on, you choose the provider, and people can go and create their own providers. Okay, so that's my sort of highlights of what went in 4.19, which is just about new stuff. There was also a load of other stuff. So there was 35 odd headline features. I haven't obviously covered them all there today. There were some other things. There is a safe shutdown feature, which CloudStack never had, across multiple management servers. CAPC aware CKS, this is on the Kubernetes side. So we've got two forms of integration, Kubernetes integration with CloudStack. We've got the CloudStack container service, which is CloudStack creating Kubernetes clusters for you. And then CAPC, which is the CAPI API, which is how you can push it out from Kubernetes to create CloudStack infrastructure. Those two things work for a long time. A lot of people use them, but they never actually spoke to each other. So the CloudStack Kubernetes service didn't know about clusters that were running that have been created through CAPC. They can now be made aware of each other. So you've got one view in your CloudStack dashboard of all of your Kubernetes clusters running in the environment. Other bits and bobs, we had some new storage providers, and Storepool made a great contribution for KVM host HA. Where is she? She is. The Slavka at the back who actually did. You did that, right? Okay. Should we give her a round of applause for contributor? Well done. Okay, there's some information. Again, I'll share these afterwards. That's the documentation on 4.19 and the GitHub link if anybody wants to contribute. So before we, just to save my voice a little bit, before we move on and start looking at some of the stuff's about to drop in 4.20, any questions at that stage on any of that?
Yeah, as the for but it still didn't.
Yeah, so okay. I'm
either
It is.
Private.
Okay, should be there. We definitely supported the management server, don't we? Somebody help me, Guido? Yeah. So there's two different questions there in a way. There's CloudStack and its agents running on Debian, and there's also the specific stuff like Marco's saying for that. Yeah. I'm not going to give you an answer here because I don't quite know the answer. So I'm going to speak to some people and we'll have a chat later if that's. Any other questions about any of? Okay. All right. What's coming in 420? This isn't official, okay, because we've had a code freeze on 420. The release manager is working through the stuff, checking for merge conflicts, etc. I assume, saves the work that Guido's just been doing would be there because I thought it was. Might have a problem with that, so it might not be there. So take this as a provision. This is a beta of an hour of a pre-release, right, in terms of what is actually going to make it in 420. Well, we had code freeze last week, so in theory, save for very complex merge conflicts or problems that come out after the release candidate, most of this should be there. Release realistically is probably about 3 weeks away, and that's just based on the history. I don't know if people here have experienced our dev community, but we'll have a number of release candidates, rounds of testing. If any issues come up, we then have another release candidate, it's retested, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on how long that stabilization takes, it can be anywhere from a week to a month, typically, to the actual release being out from the release candidate. End of October will be a safe bet. That would put it, if it was towards the end of October, EOL would be April 26. And at the moment, just looking at what's being merged, I see 31 features, significant features. There's a lot more. There's hundreds of bug fixes and minor enhancements and stuff like that in there. Again, this is me choosing what I think looks interesting. Okay, ARM64 support. Now, somebody might put their hand up now and say, well, you've actually been able to run, if as long as you can create a system VM and a template to run on ARM64, can CloudStack be all? That's been the case for some time, right? I think we created a system VM template for it a year or two ago. So it's been theoretically possible to run stuff on ARM64 instead of x386. What's now coming in 420 is the user functionality to make them aware of that and to give them the choice whether they want to run stuff on what's one particular architecture or another. So that's really what's going on here. When you create an instance, that's the screenshot of me creating an instance, creating a VM. I can now choose, if the admins allowed this to be switch this on, I can choose which architecture I want to deploy on. Okay? Obviously, if I choose ARM64, I then need to have templates and hosts to run those templates and those instances, which are ARM64, right? So that's what CloudStack is doing here. When the admin or anybody creates templates, ISOs or Kubernetes versions, which are effectively ISOs, we mark those as being one architecture or the other, okay? When a user then, and also hosts, a cluster is marked as being one or the other, okay? So when I now choose ARM64, I choose the appropriate template, CloudStack will go, what clusters have I got which are ARM64, okay? And it will send it to that cluster and then use the normal deployment algorithms from that point onwards. So it's almost, it's making what already worked, is making it public. for people to use, giving functionality. Guido's pulling a face. Oh, you were pulling a... You're just thinking about something else. Okay, there's a couple of screenshots, me adding a cluster and registering a template. Again, you've got this new field, each one, architecture type. That is not extensible, I believe, at the moment. That's the only 2 architecture types available, so there's not somewhere where you can go and configure a new architecture type. But if we do end up having new architecture types, I guess that could be moved to an extensible model at some point in the future. And that's me registering a template. And then the user doesn't have to worry. They just choose which architecture they use. They get appropriate templates, and CloudStack will deploy it to the appropriate cluster. Shared file systems. Again, something that CloudStack has been missing for some time. Those of you, everybody's familiar, I think Elastic File System from Amazon. Okay, so this is, rather than having to go and create an instance and install NFS on it and build your own file share, you can now, through CloudStack, say, I want a shared file system. Okay? Now, here's the clever bit. It is doing it again as a framework model. So what is used to create that shared file system can be changed using a provider. The provider that's being created basically creates a CloudStack instance, uses user data to put NFS on it, does a few other bits and bobs, I understand, and gives the user access how to mount that NFS share, and it appears as a shared file system. But if you wanted to do that, I'm told Ceph would be a way you might want to do it. You can create a provider to use Ceph for a shared file system for a user. That makes sense. So framework architecture, currently provider for NFS, you can choose XFS or ext4, then uses UDEV through user data to actually deploy that. Got the file system object, and I think there's 11 new APIs around this. Okay, I've just got a couple of obvious ones there. Probably the strangest one. Here we are, everything's all about, everybody's moving away from VMware. I think half of you here because you're interested in CloudStack, but you're having problems with VMware. And CloudStack has a significant new integration with VMware NSX. What's going on there? Remember, there are still a lot of people who use CloudStack on top of VMware. That use case is still there, and not everybody has had the problems with Broadcom that some other people have had. And a lot of people are staying put. Right? We've had integration in CloudStack with Tungsten Fabric for some time. It's an SDN overlay. When you're doing things at scale, makes your life a lot easier. That's really been the only option, unless you sort of hand roll stuff yourself. And there was user demand for certain users who are using CloudStack on top of VMware to have NSX integration. So it's appeared slightly counterintuitive when you see the direction of travel that's going on. So there's a network element plugin, just like the Tungsten Fabric plugin that we've already got. You configure it at zone level. There's me creating a new zone. If I choose the isolation method as NSX, I then have to start providing loads of NSX information, and it offloads a whole load of stuff that the virtual router would normally do down to NSX. It's a lovely piece of integration, works very well, but sort of unfortunately probably not going to be used by that many people as time goes on. So we have a thing in CloudStack called the usage server, which looks at your database periodically and generates usage records, which you then can push out into your billing platform, into your chargeback platform or whatever, or there's lots of third parties that integrate with that. And that's all, that service is a command line service, right? There's been historically no user interface for it. And it sort of works. It just sits there doing its stuff and generating this data, and something at the other end picks up that data either out the API or out the database, and it's fine. But when you get problems with it, it's a nightmare to troubleshoot. Okay? And that, I don't think, has been fixed by this thing, but it's going to make that troubleshooting a little bit easier. We've just got a management UI. This is an admin-only feature, again, which just lets you browse, search, order, regenerate, exports, the stuff you need to do if you've got problems with that data set. You know, a lot of people will probably still do that on the command line, but this just makes it slightly more accessible, particularly people who are not familiar with how to manage the usage data directly. Webhooks. We all know what webhooks are. It's the ability to capture an event and pass it off to some through an HTTP request somewhere else. CloudStack now has its own webhooks mechanism. Okay, importantly, user functionality. You've always been able to get events out of CloudStack with RabbitMQ or something like that, but that's been something that the admins had to configure and set up. A CloudStack user can now go and configure a normal user, if they're allowed to, if they've got permissions to do so, configure a webhook to give notifications when events are happening that they can then use to trigger workflow, notifications, whatever they want. Incredibly powerful, almost unlimited in terms of what it can do. I'm logged in here as an admin, so I can change the scope. So I could do a global webhook that's going to work for everybody. But as a user, I wouldn't even see that. As a simple user, I wouldn't even see that scope. What I understand is this, in this first iteration, doesn't then have any further filtering. Okay, so I've got a pretend payload URL there, Giles's parser. Every event relative to that scope is going to go to that parser, and it would be up to my parser to find the events that are relevant to whatever I want to do in my workflow. What I would hope to see in a future iteration of this is that, you know, you could filter the events to only send specific types to send during the payload and that sort of thing. Nearly there. Implicit hardware-based host tags. The tagging is a really powerful mechanism. Show of hands, who uses tagging in CloudStack? Really powerful because it lets you tag service offerings for storage, for compute, or whatever, with anything you want: gold, silver, bronze, premium SSD, spinning disk, whatever. And then you can map that in service offerings to push certain workload types, certain user requests into those. This is an infinitely sort of extensible model. One of the problems is, though, you have to go and set those tags up. So if you are in an environment, think earlier we were talking about ARM64, or any new types or different types of hardware, specific types of hardware, and you want to tag them, you have to go and find that hardware, whether it's storage, whether it's compute, as an admin, and put a tag next to it. Okay? Now, if you're doing that at a massive scale, that's a really big admin overhead, right? So what this lets you do is, using the CloudStack agent properties file, is deploy the tags into the host, external to CloudStack, when you deploy it using Ansible or whatever you're using to deploy your hundreds or your thousands of hosts. CloudStack will then read that and automatically tag that hardware into the tag that you've specified. Sort of use cases, GPU, different types of GPU, different types of RAID, etc., etc. And then to sample here, what have we got? This is a storage. So we've got host tags here. And then if you have a look here, we've got CPU 32, GPU type. They're agent defined. So they've been defined externally, and CloudStack is just reading them. So you would use Ansible or whatever to configure that file per host and tag that host. CloudStack is then just reading that and automatically tagging it when it's being added to the infrastructure. There's the syntax you use down below. Okay, also related to tagging, resource limits. So CloudStack's had for a long time the ability to limit resources, number of instances, number of VMs somebody can have, the amount of storage they can have, the number of IP addresses they can have. Okay, and a lot of people actually use those limits as like a commercial model, and then their commercial website will change the limits in CloudStack. But those limits have been inflexible and not granular. They're almost like hard-coded limits. There was about 10 of them. Okay, you can now, on the compute side and storage side, make extensible limits. And again, it's using the tagging mechanism. So we have these global settings down at the bottom, resource limit host tags. I've created just illustration 2 there called GPU ARM64. And for storage, I've created premium SSD, high IOPS disk. Yeah, they could be whatever. They're just words, they're just tags. Okay. When I create a service offering, in this case is a disk offering, storage offering, I then map that tag. Okay. And here's the really nice piece. When you go to the limits area, this is for a user, but it could be for a domain, it could be for an account, as well as what we've always had traditionally, max user instances set at 20, those tags are now appearing. So I'm going to limit somebody to have 10 ARM64 and 5 GPU instances. Okay, so it's completely extensible. Okay, as long as you can map something, and you could tie that in with the new hardware-based tagging mechanism to have limits set around the amount of anything. The moment that's only works for compute and storage. Okay, so there's not a concept, because how would you tag IP addresses and that sort of thing? But that might be something that somebody might think about in the future. Okay, for various different frameworks, sorry, Guido, I'm going to mention it again. For the object storage framework, we've now got a new provider for Ceph, hopefully. No pressure. I think that's the 3rd time I mentioned now. And also on the backup and recovery framework, which is the framework for backup vendors to talk to CloudStack. There's a new one, which is a simple NAS-based, not from a commercial vendor. It's been done as part of the CloudStack project, a simple NAS-based backup option. Backroll is another open source solution that's already there, which comes from our friends Dimsy. Dell Network, or Dell Total Security, whatever they call it now, has got a provider. Veeam, unfortunately, Veeam doesn't work with KVM, which is a bit of a problem, but there is a Veeam provider there already. And I know of other backup providers who are working on this at the moment. It's good to see. Okay, this is some of the people I talk to tell me this is the most exciting thing in 420. Right, I'm really not a network guy, okay? And every time we have network conversations at work, I have to have things explained to me 3 times. I'm almost going to read some slides to you. There are people in this room, Guido is a great example, who know a lot more about this than I do. So I'll put my hand up there. I will struggle to answer questions on this, but I'll be honest when I'm on the edge of my knowledge. In terms of user networks, we've had shared networks and isolated networks, stroke VPC. Shared networks, there is no virtual router involved, and your instances have their own IP addresses. Whereas with isolated and VPC, okay, we're NATing using the virtual router. The problem is users couldn't really create shared networks because of the configuration. You'd have to. Am I making sense? Good. Okay. So you can now specify a network to be in rooted mode, which I'm told makes the virtual router behave like a true gateway instead of NATing. VMs are directly accessible. Apparently there's quite a big performance gain because there's no NATing going on, but early estimates have gone between 2.5 times performance gain. There's 2 modes, dynamic and static. If you choose dynamic, CloudStack is going to do all of the stuff necessary for your upstream router. Okay, somebody help me here. I don't know what the stuff necessary is. BGP routes and that sort of stuff. I'm showing you some screenshots. I've got a network offering. I'm choosing dynamic routing. The network type over there is rooted or not rooted. And then for dynamic routing, you can now specify this information and that information. Okay. Okay. Did I handle that okay? Okay. Yeah, that's what I was worried about. And that's where all the... You can use Virtual 6 in a VPC. Fantastic. If anybody has any questions on this, Guido, Marco, and actually quite a few of the people in the room are much better qualified than me. All right, that's my whistle-stop tour of effectively 419 and 420, although with the caveat that we haven't got the release candidate out for 420 yet. That list there might be something else dropped in that I just haven't seen. In theory, code freezes happen, so that shouldn't happen. Chances are there might be some of that stuff doesn't quite make it if there's popping. Any questions? That's me signaling for help if anybody asks me about the new routing functionality. Okay. But two questions there. Yeah. So I suppose first of all, the reason I didn't mention that here is that there's about another 100 in minor. I've just tried to pick things which are big and glossy and new. Yeah, if it went in before the 10th, it would make the 420 cuts. That's in 420 run, is it? Yeah. Okay. And yes, there probably will be a 419. 2, 3, 2. There probably will be some. So answer is yes to both of those things. Any other questions? No. Well, that's me then. Are we about right for time? We'll get some coffee. It's coffee time. Thank you very much.